Welcome to the Ada Lovelace Day podcast. I'm Sue Charman-Anderson, and this month we're talking to Dr. Maryanne Mariyaselvam about how medical innovations and inventions can help save lives by making mistakes literally impossible. And in a slight change to our usual programming, we chat to neuroscientist Dr. Dean Burnett about why role models are so important and what imposter syndrome is and how to combat it. This month we'll also take a look at the invention of the electrothermal hydrazine thruster, a type of propulsion system developed by Yvonne Brill in the late 1960s, which became the industry standard for satellites and other spacecraft. But first, a quick word about Ada Lovelace Day Live, our annual STEM cabaret on the 10th of October at the Royal Institution in London. If you like women in STEM, then you have just got to come along because we have an awesome lineup. We've got Dr. Brenna Hassett talking about the surprising history of your skeleton, Natural History Museum curator Miranda Lowe on how curating the dead influences the study of the living, and Yasmin Ali, who's asking just what does ice cream have to do with chemical engineering? Tickets are £20 for general entry and £5 for concession, and you can buy them from our website at findingada.com, where you can also find out a lot more about all of our fabulous speakers. But now, on with the show. So this month I'm with Dr. Maryanne Mariyaselvam, who is a clinical research fellow at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn. Hi Maryanne.
Hello.
So, clinical research fellow, can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you do?
So I'm a clinical research fellow, is that I'm a clinician, so I'm a practicing doctor, but I've actually taken some time out of my clinical work to do a research post at the moment. So I'm currently doing research and actually also doing my doctorate at the University of Cambridge.
So what is your specific field of research?
So my specific field of research is looking at why errors happen in healthcare, and I'm particularly focusing on something called never events. So these are errors which should never occur in healthcare, but we know that they do. So I'm looking at why these errors happen. I'm actually also interviewing people that have made this error, and I'm developing solutions to prevent this error from happening. And then I'm helping clinicians to actually introduce and implement them into clinical practice and supporting that kind of progress through as well. And we've developed a number of solutions to prevent a number of never events. My job at the moment is to support clinicians to implement them, as well as writing up my dissertation and my doctorate for my doctorate.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of these innovations?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of them is called the non-injectable arterial connector. So very simply, we use arterial lines in operating theatres and intensive care to very accurately measure blood pressure and to take blood samples as well. Now, you must never give medication into the arterial line, but you always want to take blood samples from it. So we developed a very simple solution, which was an arterial connector that goes onto the arterial line, almost exactly the same as any other arterial connector. However, what our one has a one-way valve in it, so it means that you can always take the blood sample but never inject, so that even when the clinician tries or forgets that it's there, even if they try to make them an error, they physically can't do so. So that's one of them. And you may think, why has no one ever developed this before? It sounds like a very kind of no-brainer idea. But I think that's one of the difficulties with innovation and implementation, is that lots and lots of people have this idea, but it's actually physically driving it through the process and getting it introduced into hospitals takes such a long time. It's now kind of becoming more and more recognised, and it's available kind of in the NHS.
So why does it take so long to get what seems to be a very simple, as you say, no-brainer solution? Why does it take so long to go from the idea, the drawing board, into widespread adoption?
I think there are two different aspects to it. One is upskilling the clinician, or whoever. So my expertise is in medicine. I don't know intellectual property. I don't know how to patent things. I don't know how to set up a business. I don't know how to, So all of those factors are involved, and you're having to learn all those things very, very quickly. And we're very lucky in our region, where I work. We have an organisation called the Health Enterprise East, which is an innovation agency, and they actually help clinicians. So they were set up by NHS England but they help clinicians who have an idea to kind of take it and drive it forward and get it onto the market. So that's your kind of first big hurdle. And when you actually eventually get to a position where you have a product that's being manufactured and due to all the regulations and is actually being able to be used clinically, you then have and I'd say that's about 10% of the problem, or 10% of the journey even. And then you've got the rest of the 90% of the journey is then getting it introduced into clinical practice. And it's different in different healthcare systems, but in the NHS we have something called a semi-integrated NHS. So every single hospital is ever so slightly different, and they have different structures and they have different processes, and you have to get out to every single hospital in the UK. Now, if you're a very, very big company and you have the infrastructure to be able to do that, then you can access all of them very quickly. Whereas if you're two people, then it's really hard to do that. So you're having to really progress that and push that in a really, really slow way. Obviously, by that time you've developed all the research as well, and then it's about kind of advertising and getting your name out there and getting your innovation out there. So it's a long, long journey if you're a kind of a one or two people doing it. On the flip side, actually, our latest innovation, which is called the wire safe. So that's an innovation which prevents retained guide wires. So when you do something called Seldinger procedures, which is when you insert, for example, a central line or a PICC line or a chest drain, what you do is you put a guide wire in first, you feed the catheter over the guide wire, and then you remove the guide wire. So the guide wire allows the clinician to place the catheter in the right place. Now, 1 in 3,000 procedures, what can happen is that someone can accidentally forget to remove the guide wire. And with a central line, the guide wire can travel down into the heart, can cause fibrillation. There's a reported up to 20% mortality with this complication. So we developed a solution which it's slightly kind of out of the box a little bit, but it basically uses the guide wire as a forcing function. So the wire safe contains all of the equipment that you need to complete the procedure after you'd normally remove the guide wire. So needle holder and a dressing, and that's inside a locked pack. But the only way that you can access that is by using the guide wire as a key. But very importantly, with both of these innovations, you'll see if you actually look at how they work, it's been made very, very simple and very, very easy for the user, so that it's actually easier to do the safer method than it is to do the current method. And that's a big part of implementation as well. You've got to make it convenient and easier for the user to use, and then you're more likely to get implementation. But conversely, compared to the arterial connector, that's taken about 1.5 years to get onto the market. So it was introduced into clinical practice. So the processes that we've learned has made a difference. So having gone through all those processes a number of times, you're now able to do it very, very rapidly and make it very, very straightforward. That doesn't make it easier, but it makes it a little bit quicker.
Well, I guess, whatever you're doing, there's always a learning curve, whether it's clinical work or invention, which is, what this is. What's your process for deciding which problems to address and how you come up with the solution?
With the arterial connector and with the wire safe, both of those problems we've seen firsthand in our hospital, and this is public knowledge. So, what you'll find is that this is pretty much the same in every hospital around the world. This is a problem that doesn't just affect the NHS; it affects everybody, and that's because at the end of the day, it's humans doing these procedures, and humans are fallible and they will make mistakes. And we're doing very, very complex procedures, and so you've got to make it really easy for the individual. It's really seeing it firsthand and then looking at how it actually happened. So you look at the whole process, and with both the arterial connector and the wire safe, I guess, you look at the process from how you take an arterial line sample and where those errors can occur, and then filing it down to kind of, at this pinpoint, if you make a forcing function or a stop mechanism at this pinpoint, then you can stop all of those errors. So I guess that's how we've really kind of come about it. When any clinician makes an error, no clinician decides to go into a hospital and thinks, I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to cause a never event. So it's really devastating for the doctor that makes a mistake as well. So when the clinician made the mistake of the retained guide wire, it was really devastating, and he was personally very devastated. And it's a mistake, and so if you can try to protect people, help people from not making mistakes, and that's quite important too.
Yeah, and I think as well, you have these relatively simple solutions to problems that are themselves actually quite simple, and yet you are clinicians, not manufacturers. So how do you go from this idea for how we can prevent this from happening to finished product?
So when we did the wire safe, that's probably the easiest way to explain it. There's a friend that we know that has a 3D printer, so we kind of said this is what we kind of want it to look like, this is what we wanted to do functionally, and he went away and did some CAD drawings and was able to 3D print the box. We went through something about 9 or 10 iterations of that. When you look at it, you'd think it looks very, very simple, but it has taken a number of iterations to get it just absolutely right, because what you don't want to do is people trying to work around the solution. So you don't want them to be able to kind of get into it without having the guide wire. So you've got to make it really flush and get the design right and everything. So we went through kind of that process, our simulation study with our prototype. Based on that we've got our publication. We then took it to a manufacturer that we'd been working with a previous product. And because we have a good relationship with them, and they've been involved in developing different plastics for another innovation, this fit in really easily with their kind of line, kind of manufacturing line. So they said, yeah, that's fine. We're quite happy with that. So they've taken on that innovation. Now, conversely, with the arterial connector, and probably what's more usual in the NHS, because I think with the WireSafe that's quite a rare situation. It's very, very hard to get a manufacturer to go, yep, we'll take this on. So with the arterial connector, for example, it's we had the idea, we created the prototypes, and that was through kind of playing with a number of different connectors and literally just fixing them in our labs and putting them together and trying to get the mechanism to work. We were able to put the patents in, and then we went to this the innovation agency that's for our region, and they were able to support us with the patent costs and protecting it and taking it through all the legal processes, getting the intellectual property sorted out with the hospital. Then they were able to help us find a manufacturer. And then the manufacturer, and then one of the things that's really good about the innovation agency is because they know how to write contracts really well, so they protect you as clinicians as well. Having those people there supporting you is really fantastic, and we still have a very, very good relationship with them kind of 8 years on. They found a manufacturer who had then developed it, and then that manufacturer has a distributor as well, so then they were able to then put it onto the market and get it introduced clinically.
There's a website that has information about these inventions, the clipsuk.com website, which anyone can go and look at, and you can see all the 3 of the inventions and the clinical trials and stuff. On there it mentions the NHS Innovation and Technology Tariff and what your involvement with that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Innovation and Technology Tariff is newly been introduced by NHS England. Now, there are many tariffs that are already available on the NHS, but this is a new one for innovation. And what this does is that it takes relatively new, but our innovations have been around for some time, as I've described, and top funds them essentially from the NHS. So effectively, it funds the hospitals to allow them to try them and give them a go for a couple of years, effectively. And this was quite a substantial process. So obviously, it has to go through nice recommendations. It's got to be a product that's CE marked and available for clinical use. It's got to have proven benefit and be cost saving for the NHS, but most importantly. And it's basically to give patients faster access to best new practice, effectively. And the reason really why this innovation was introduced was because in the NHS it does take some time to, not just the NHS, in healthcare systems it takes time for these innovations, for new practice to be introduced and to be implemented across the whole healthcare system. So for example, the quoted figure from kind of when you have a clinically marked CE marked product to full implementation in the NHS is something like 14 to 17 years. And it's staggering that it does take so long, and it's because we do have something called a semi-integrated system. So even though it's kind of known as the NHS and it feels like one system, it's not. All the different hospitals do work as independent bodies, and they have their own processes and slightly different systems that you have to then navigate and go through. Because of that, and because of the length of time it takes, and because it was felt that these patients need to get access to these cost saving and good practice innovations quicker, this tariff was introduced to support a faster adoption of these new innovations. We were very fortunate that of the 6 that were chosen this year, two of them were ours out of something like 200 applications, I think.
To me, this is a really interesting intersection between technology, engineering, and medicine. And I think sometimes we hear the word innovation and we think about technology and probably computing. We hear the word medicine and we think about drugs. And engineering, we tend to think about bridges. And I think this is really interesting to hear how these things also come together in this context. I mean, how on earth did you end up doing this kind of work and inventing these products, these life-saving, potentially, products?
That's a really good question. I kind of asked myself that a couple of times as well. So it sounds completely strange that I'm doing this, a bit of engineering, a bit of medicine, and a bit of technology and innovation. So I finished medical school, and in the NHS you have to do a number of years of very general practice before you then specialise. And one of the specialities that I did was in intensive care, where I met my colleague that I work with. We worked quite closely together with developing a lot of these innovations. He's already developed a number of safety innovations and doing a lot of research and kind of safety innovations there at the time anyway. That's how I started initially doing research on some of the innovations that he'd already developed. And then that kind of got me thinking, and that kind of really opened my eyes and kind of thought, wow, you can actually do something about it. You can, instead of going, oh, that's the norm, or that's just the way it works. So when you're at medical school, you have this very, or maybe it was just me, I had this very idealistic view of what the NHS was like and what working in healthcare was like, and then it's really when you start working that you realise the imperfections, and you realise that it's not a perfect system. The NHS is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but there are things that do happen, these errors do happen. And I think it was really after I started working with Peter, my colleague, that it really opened my eyes, and I thought, actually, you can do something about it. You don't have to just kind of go, oh, okay, well, that's just the status quo, or that's just the way it is. And I think it was also the practicalities of it as well, is that not just kind of thinking about doing something, but actually how you can actually physically go over and do it. This is how you patent it, this is how you do this, and it was learning all those skills from him as well, and having the support from another clinician, having someone to mentor you and show you how to do it, and actually support you in that process as well has been really, really helpful. So I guess that's how I kind of started thinking about it. So after I finished my clinical, my 2 years of initial clinical practice, I genuinely believed through medical school that I wanted to do surgery, and that was my goal and that was my aim, and I applied for a surgical position very early on, and after my 2 years I got my surgical job. Absolutely one of those really nerdy, geeky people at medical school as well, where I had all my logbooks and everything ready for my surgical applications, way before. And I got my position and I got the job that I wanted, but unfortunately by that time I'd done my ITU rotation. And I loved the research that I was doing. I loved the clinical work as well, but I loved the research. And I had to kind of make a decision. Do I carry on doing research and not really having anywhere to go or not to do, or do I take on my surgical job that I'd got? And I decided that I thought, I've been wanting to do general surgery for 7 years, and I just got to give it a chance and make sure that this is what, I can't just give up now just because I'm having a bit of doubts. So I started my general surgical job, left the research work, and absolutely hated it. I did it for a good number of months and just thought, if I wanted to do general surgery, the consultants and the team I had were amazing, and it would have been the best experience for me, but something had changed in the last kind of 6 months or so, when my eyes had suddenly been open to this kind of new way of doing things, I guess. And then you have to make a decision. Do you then carry on with a career that it was a very competitive process. I got a training post, which obviously other people hadn't got the post because I had got it. And do you carry on and do your exams and go through the 7 years of training and for something that you think that you might not like, or do you just say, actually, I want to change career completely and move and and take a complete left field? I was thinking about this for a number of months, and very fortunately a research post came up in the hospital that I was previously working with, looking at implementing safety innovations back in the region that I was previously in, working back in the hospital where I was previously in. And I thought, I've got to apply for this. This is a wonderful chance, and so I applied for it, and I was very fortunate got the post. But I had a lot of criticism from my other colleagues and from friends and from family who thought I was completely insane to give up a training position because, of all the reasons where you've been very selfish and taking that position away from somebody else, and this is career suicide. What are you doing? Being in any sort of training post, it's a secure job for a number of years, and so to suddenly give that up to kind of go off and do a little bit of what they thought was a little bit of research, it seemed completely mad. And I just had to take the plunge and just decided that this is what I wanted to do, and I just decided to go for it. And I'm so glad that I did, because it's led on to the most amazing career opportunities that I would never have come across if I'd stayed in the surgical position. So my research has turned into me doing a doctorate at Cambridge University, which went all the wonderful experiences that I've had through being at Cambridge and being part of a college, and having that community of friends there. My work has kind of got onto national programs where I'm becoming a kind of a safety expert nationally. I'm invited speaker at a number of conferences. I'm published in lots of journals. So academically my career is flourishing, and it was the best decision I ever made. But it's quite scary at the time when you sit there and think, what do I do? But it's sometimes you just have to take that risk and just go with your gut. Sorry, it's quite a convoluted answer, but that's how I got to where I am now, I guess.
I think it's quite important to remember that the vision we create for ourselves of what our future career is going to be, particularly when we're a lot younger, it can change in the light of new information. And we should embrace that. I mean, certainly half of my career has been doing stuff that wasn't invented when I was at university. So, I think we should be flexible and think about opportunities when they come up, rather than kind of insisting, 16-year-old me said I was going to be this, I must be that thing.
And I think also, to add to that, I'd say don't always listen to what your professors or your supervisors say. I think what they say is relevant and important, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because I think times change, and what necessarily allowed them to get their career pathway isn't necessarily what's happening right now, and you can get to the same career position without following that exact pathway. So that's one thing that I've always been, now having gone through all the processes, I think about that a lot, and I know that if I'd just listened to other people, I'd certainly never be where I am now. So it's always worth, I think that's, if there's any advice I give, I'd say just take it with a pinch of salt, what they say.
Well, it seems to me that it was not just an excellent decision for you, but also for all the patients who are going to benefit from these innovations that you've helped bring into hospitals. So it's been a real pleasure talking to you. We could carry on this conversation for ages, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks to Maryanne for explaining how medical inventions make it from lab to hospital. You can find out more about Maryanne on our website at findingada.com/podcast, where we also have a link to her Twitter account at @Mariyaselvam. Our podcast is made possible thanks to the generous support of ARM, our exclusive semiconductor industry sponsor. You can find out more about ARM's energy-efficient microprocessor technology on their website at arm.com, and you can follow them on Twitter at ARM Holdings. Now it's time to look at an invention that we all benefit from, probably on a daily basis, but that's so far away it's basically invisible. Our story starts in the late 1960s, and the space race is well underway. The first artificial satellite was launched just a decade before in 1957, kicking off a string of firsts from both the US and the USSR. The first human in space, Yuri Gagarin, in 1961. The first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963. The first geosynchronous satellite, also in 1963. The first geostationary satellite, in 1964. The list is long and impressive. By 1966, the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, was working on the problem of communication satellites and, specifically, how to move them about while they're in orbit. At that point, satellites had different propulsion systems for different purposes. The apogee motor, used to manoeuvre the satellite into its final trajectory, used solid fuel, and once that had burnt out, any course adjustments relied on a chemical propulsion system. These different systems needed different fuels and different fuel tanks, adding unnecessary weight to the satellite. What was needed was something simpler, something lighter, something more accurate and more flexible. Enter Yvonne Brill, an experienced chemical engineer who'd been working in the space industry since the 40s. Brill was one of only 5 women working as engineers at RCA at the time, and she was the only propulsion engineer on the project, with complete responsibility for the propulsion systems. Brill ruled out the new and impressive electric propulsion systems. There was just no way that her tiny spacecraft could generate enough power, and instead she started looking at chemical thrusters. On the one hand, there was hydrazine, a propellant that gives off heat when it decomposes in the presence of a catalyst. On the other hand, there's the resistojet, a thruster that heats a propellant, vaporizing it and creating thrust from the gas's expansion. Brill's design combined both techniques. She worked out that if you put both the heater and the catalyst in the engine, the hydrazine decomposition would reach 3000 F or about 1650 C, making the engine much more efficient. Brill's engine had 2 sets of thrusters, one that could produce large amounts of thrust in the range of 1 to 5 pounds, and another that produced thrust in the millipound range. The large thrusters used the catalytic decomposition of hydrazine to produce force, whereas the smaller thrusters relied on the heated resistojet elements and could be controlled by adjusting the amount of heat applied to the hydrazine. RCA liked Brill's idea, and in 1967 she started work on the patent application. Although the patent was granted in 1974, it would be nearly 10 years before Brill would see her invention actually in use. Although RCA tried to convince several customers to use the system on their satellites, it wasn't until 1983, in a joint experiment between RCA and a company called Rocket Research, that a single-engine hydrazine resistojet was tested. The hydrazine resistojet was renamed the electrothermal hydrazine thruster and became the satellite industry standard. Not only did it show improved performance and reliability, it also required less propellant by weight than previous systems, allowing for increased payloads or longer missions. Brill contributed to many other space projects, including managing the solid rocket motor on NASA's Space Shuttle and working on the International Maritime Satellite Organization's Inmarsat communication satellites. Yvonne Brill's innovations were hugely significant, and she received several awards for her work, including the National Medal of Technology, America's highest honour in the field. So, the next time you use a satellite, for example the next time you use GPS, watch satellite TV or listen to satellite radio, say a little thank you to Yvonne Brill. So this month I would like to welcome to the podcast Dean Burnett, Doctor of Neuroscience, lecturer at Cardiff University, author and blogger. Hi Dean.
Hi Sue.
So Dean, which woman in STEM are you going to be talking to us about this month?
I have plenty of options. When I think of women in science, I don't actually have a go-to person in that respect. I mean, I thought of people like Diane Fossey or even Susan Blackmore. I saw her do an excellent talk at TED once and got me interested in her. paranormal research. These are people I'm sort of aware of. I wouldn't sort of go anywhere near as far as say they are role models. So I was trying to think of women in STEM who have sort of inspired me personally. And the only ones I could really think of were my A-level science teachers, particularly Mrs. Francine Thomas, my chemistry teacher at A-level, who excellent chemistry teacher, but also showed me sort of a very practical application of science, which really got me into it once when, I think I mentioned this on Twitter once, that she had a strict policy whereby if she caught you drawn on the desks, because I didn't go to a particularly refined school in that respect, there were lots of little charming vandals around. If she caught you drawn on the desks, she'd make you come in at lunchtime and scrub it clean. You know, they were old style wooden desks, so biro just got really into the cracks, so it took a long time. But she didn't always catch you because the classes are quite big, and it was an underfunded area. And one time it was in A-level chemistry class, and this is also a reflection of my school in that there's about 1,000 students at any one time. And when I did my A-levels, the final year of A-levels, if you added up the A-level chemistry, physics and biology class, you got 13 students. Oh, sorry, you got 7 students, 13 in the first year, then it dropped to 7. Out of those 7 students, 3 of them were me. Basically I was half the school's science body, and but there were 2 of us in the class, and she was just wandering around looking for, checking the desks, and she found someone drawn on one and muttered to herself, went to the cupboard, got some ethanol and put it on a cotton wool ball and wiped it clean off. And within 3 seconds I said, "You just clean that straight away?" And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "You make them scrub it for half an hour?" She goes, "I know, yeah." I said, "Oh, that's how, right." And then I just sort of understood that if you do science, you can be the clever one, which was quite handy. It was quite an inspirational moment for me. A valuable teaching exercise, even though she didn't mean it as such. But to say a role model is probably quite a stretch there as well. And if I'm being honest, the more I've thought about it, I realise I don't really have any role models in terms of an individual person. I've never been the sort of person to have that sort of thing. There's never been one particular person I've looked up to, wanted to emulate, or wanted to be like. Very different to the rest of my family, like my father and mother and the rest of the family. None of them are academics in my sense. Like, most of them didn't make it to A-levels. So once I got past the age of 14, 15, I was essentially on my own in terms of figuring things out. And I think that's had sort of a lasting impression on me. So, and when I say I can't think of any female role models, I also mean male role models too. There's no particular male scientist who I find inspiring or breathtaking or I want to be like. And a lot of the more high-profile male scientists tend to be quite really them again, that sort of thing. In my personal opinion, a lot of the time. Some people might think that about me, and that's fair enough. But yeah, I've never been one for individual role models. It's more like the ethos. I'm interested in science as a gestalt, if you want to say it like that, or STEM subjects. I like them for what they are, rather than who does them.
And I think actually, listeners might be going, "Well, why are you talking to Dean if he doesn't have a role model, particularly a woman, to talk about?" But actually, I think it's really important to talk about the nature of role models, and actually to say that it is okay to look back at your childhood, your teenage years, whatever, and kind of question whether or not you had a role model, because not everyone does. I don't ever want to make people feel like, well, I don't have a role model, so, therefore I'm lacking, because actually, role models it's a complicated subject. A lot of this as well is tied in with how we communicate science in general. And this is something that we touched when I spoke to Dr. Thoran Helgason. Scientists tend not to be the subject of the story, their discoveries are, and therefore we tend not to hear about the stories of the people involved. And that then makes it harder to relate to them as individuals, and that makes it harder to see them as role models, because we're talking about the discovery or the science, not the person who made it. It's key to talk about how role models do evolve, when they evolve, and also some of the areas that you look at as well around cognitive biases and why we're more likely perhaps to imbue men with role model status than women.
Yeah, it's a really sort of rich area in terms of the psychological analysis which can be applied to it. And I guess the more I think about it, I say I didn't have a role model. Well, currently I am a working class Welsh Valley neuroscientist comedian. I mean, who else has done that in terms of, who was my role model in that respect? Clearly I'm just pursuing my own interests, so I can't really point to someone and say they're the one I was trying to be like, because I've just guessed my entire life in that respect, and a lot of people do the same. It depends on, I suppose, what you want to do in terms of, if I want to be like this, I want to do that. Who else has done that? Who knows how to do this? Because people always pitch themselves as, if someone wants, well, essentially someone wants your money, saying you could be like me, aspirational things like that. Sort of, we want to be higher status, we want to have people like us, and the obvious default way of finding out how to do that is to look at other people who are liked and see what they do and see what their characteristics are, which other people tend to gravitate towards and respect. And that's one way of doing things. Obviously, it's a human instinct to be communal, be social, and to but also have a status, like dominance and status and hierarchy, that's deeply embedded into a lot of species' brains, not just ours. It's very, pecking order comes from the fact that it exists in chickens. That's just where the term comes from. So we do have a tendency to find someone to look up to and to want to be like and to want to maybe usurp one day. So that's sort of like just an instinctive drive we all sort of have. But it's not essential. Like, so we are humans now. We're not primitive creatures. We can think beyond our basic instincts. And it's, some people are like that and some people don't need to do that. And some people have their own thing. Some people are purely egotistical and can't think of anyone else being better than them, and therefore they don't have role models. They have targets to overthrow and destroy. But then you get the sort of the gender divide in terms of, male role models are very common, women role models not so much, and that probably has to do with the way society is structured. Like, men are expected to be the higher status ones, the big dominant ones, the alpha males, however you interpret that term. So it's sort of familiar to see a man being in charge, being the boss, being the one to look up to, and not quite as common for women to have that role. And as a result, therefore, it's probably more important to have women role models which are visible, like Ada Lovelace, like the whole point of this podcast, I suppose, because it's a lot more difficult for a woman to say, I'm interested in science, how do I go about it? So, the more easy it is to find a prominent woman scientist, the more likely it is for women to say, oh yes, that is an option, I can do that. Maybe not a role model, maybe just a precedent to be set. We need as many precedents as possible for women who are interested in STEM subjects to be able to say, well, I can do this. That's fine. Look, there's one, there's another one right there. It's perfectly common. There's no reason I can't do this. And the more role models there are, the better for creating that sort of data bank of examples, really.
And you mentioned we're a social species and we kind of learn off each other. Are women also learning to keep their heads down?
I imagine there probably is a lot of that too. You see so many different articles about things like imposter syndrome and things like lean in. It's the default assumption that at the top it's a man's world and you have to do this, that and the other in order to fit in with that. It is true insofar as people see that and assume it's the case and then conform to it, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's nothing separating men and women in terms of intelligence and ability when it comes to anything quite, at the top levels. So it is a thing insofar as we've created that it persists because we see other people doing it and assume they must know they must be there for a reason. But it's when you start challenging things and start trying to, well, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this thing. And a lot of the time, in my own experience, people just assume like things happen this way. So when you don't do it, they just get confused and they might tell you can't do that. And then you say why, and then they haven't got a good answer. And then, then you end up making some progress. And that's basically defined my entire existence. It's like they told me in school, you can't do 4 A-levels at once. Because why not? You don't. Because, well, I haven't got a social life, so I could do that. Because, well, fine then. And I did, and that was fine. And, so, someone from your background, you can't do a PhD. So why not? Well, because you don't normally. As well, I have nothing else to do right now. So I pursued it. And therefore, once you get beyond that point, no one really tends to stop you, I suppose. They assume you're there for a reason.
Yeah, I think the, well, why not, is an excellent question for people to learn to ask. Certainly my O-levels, because I am that old, were very much along that line. I ended up doing physics, chemistry, so far so good, needlework and dress, Latin, and technical drawing. And there was an awful lot of why do you, and I'm like, well, why not? And in actual fact, they had to kind of rejigger the timetable around so that I could fit all my classes in, because they were such a weird combination. And in some ways, it had never occurred to me that what I wanted to do wasn't normal, and that was actually quite a facilitating attitude. So the, well, why not is a good habit to get into.
Yeah, that's something I've really learned to live by, in that when someone tells you, you can't do that, unless you've got a solid reason, unless it's like written down somewhere like in statutes or on a stone tablet, if it goes back that far or whatever, then I'm going to have a go. I'll have, like, when they approached me and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? Because, well, I haven't, but I'll have a go because that's sort of something I haven't done before, and I'll see if I can do it. That'll be interesting. And again, I am the classic straight white bald guy with glasses, so I look like I should be a scientist, I guess. I suppose I've cultivated this look over many years, and I've looked like this since I was 15. So they sort of let me do A-level science. Oh, he's bound to pass. Look at him. And so like the stereotypes worked in my favour in that respect, but it's also something to consider. I think it's actually quite. Do you read much Pratchett?
Oh yes, big Pratchett fan.
Yeah, Going Postal, one of my favourite ones, is when Royce von Lipwig wants to visit Mr. Grote in the hospital. And he said, well, once you sneak away past like the reception guards and you're in there, then people assume you're meant to be there and just leave you alone. And that's sort of what I've ended up as, oh, well, he's doing this, he must be there for a reason, or it must be okay, and then they just ignore you. Again, as a classic straight white guy, it's probably easy for me to say that, but the more often women get to do it, then the more common it'll become, and then people just go, oh, well, I guess that's how it works, and then shrug and move on, which is hopefully what the point we'll get to, I suppose.
Yeah, shrug and move on would be a great point to get to. So you mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. What is imposter syndrome, and particularly when it comes to women, why is it important?
Imposter syndrome it's sort of like the inverse of the Dunning-Kruger effect in a way. It's the common phenomenon whereby people who are high up in any particular field, particularly a complex one like science or STEM subjects, the higher they get up, the more and more they have self-doubt that they're not meant to be there. They're just bluffing their way through everything, and soon they're going to be found out because you're hanging around with people of your intellectual equal all the time, and you assume they all know what they're talking about because everyone's learned to speak confidently, everyone sort of gets their work done, everyone does their papers, but odds are everyone else is thinking the exact same thing, just no one ever says it out loud. Like, you're not in the middle of a conference suddenly going, I shouldn't be here, and run out screaming. That tends to not happen purely for social pressures. And it's quite common, like the more intelligent you are, it tends to be the case that the more self-doubt you have. Not always, of course. I've met many intelligent people who are convinced they are the centre of the universe, which is an unhelpful attitude. But it's like the more intelligent you are, the more you know. So the more aware you are, the more you realise how much you don't know, because it's kind of impossible for anyone to know everything about a specific subject. Like, if you're into cutting-edge science, the whole point of the field is that we don't know everything. There is so much to be found out. And you become sort of more aware of how, insignificant is probably too strong a term, but how insubstantial your own knowledge and awareness is. So like, you have so much more to compare it to, whereas Dunning-Kruger style, if you have less intelligence, you're far more confident, because the ability to recognise how intelligent you are requires intelligence. That's something you have to be able to assess yourself and make rational, accurate judgments of what you're capable of and compare them to others. That requires intelligence. So if you don't have that baseline level of intelligence, you are very bad at measuring your own intelligence. So therefore you have no reason to doubt that you don't know anything, and therefore you just spout things out loud and shout your opinions assuming they're all correct. Yeah, and you seem really confident, and that's another sort of potential flaw in the human brain, in that we treat confidence, we trust confidence. We actually look at someone who's confident, and sort of the default assumption is, well, they're confident, they must know what they're talking about, they must be right. And therefore you can be extremely dumb, extremely stupid, and then shout your mouth off about anything, and then be elected president, for example. Not naming names there, but sort of catch-22 of the brain. The more intelligent you are, the less confident you are. The less confident you are, the less people will trust you, and as a result, scientists end up being the sort of the geeky, sort of insecure ones, rather than the gaze at my brilliancy mortals of the sometimes the intellect you think would demand. But no, it doesn't work like that.
So are there sort of techniques? Are there other cognitive biases that we can employ and subvert to counter imposter syndrome?
I don't think there's any particular way to sort of play biases off against one another, but it's often a case of awareness is important. Like, once you know that imposter syndrome is a real thing, and that other people have it too, or very likely to have it, then you sort of like you experience these self-doubts, and you think, oh no, wait, that could be imposter syndrome. So then you sort of doubt your doubts, and that sort of inversely affects the system, whereby you end up sort of becoming more confident again, or at least you're aware now that what you're thinking isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of reality. It's just your own tendency to do that. And as you say, like, women are far more prone to this, according to data that I've seen, because all these higher up fields, like the top of science or engineering, like that, those are traditionally male dominated because of our somewhat imbalanced society. And so any woman who's there has to contend with their own self-doubt anyway, but also presented with the evidence that they're normally surrounded by big, confident, bullshit sounding men as well. So that just adds to the feeling of, I don't belong here because I am atypical for this environment. And that's not how it works. You belong there because you're qualified to be there. You have the skills, the intellect necessary to do the job. But again, social norms have a lot more pressure on us than we tend to realise. So you tend to think that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe it's all a mistake. Maybe it's a bureaucratic error. Which again, I have moments when I think my entire career has been one long admin mess up from like 2003 to now. And but I'm not drawing attention to that fact because then someone will fix it, and then I'll fall back into obscurity where I probably belong.
So I think one of the key moments that I remember that helped my confidence, because I think a lot of people think I'm really confident because I do this podcast, I do a Lovelace Day, but I'm not a hugely confident person. I just kind of play one in public. But the moment of realizing that other people weren't paying as much attention to me as I thought because they were actually more concerned about themselves and how they looked and how they were coming across was a bit of a revelation, because it meant that I could start to dismiss some of my concerns about how I assumed other people thought about me. It's that kind of tactic. Is that worth trying to employ to fake it till you make it on the confidence front?
That is a really interesting aspect of it. It's something I've experienced a lot firsthand because I do a lot of stand-up comedy as well, and that's really like the baptism of fire when it comes to trying to seem confident without being confident. That's also a very strange situation psychologically, because it's not something people normally gravitate towards. People find that the idea just terrifying a lot of the time. And I did it first, but then I sort of started doing it, and that's a really good way to make you realise what are the actual consequences of doing this. You're standing in front of people talking. That terrifies a lot of people, but only on the sort of, it's a strange bias we have against social rejection. We're really sort of prone to avoid it at all costs. And when you do that, you are actually setting yourself up to be rejected, potentially. Other people, you think that's going to happen, but then even if you have a really bad gig, which I have done many times, the consequences of it are sort of a lot more limited than they are in your head. So like, you have a bad gig, people don't laugh, you walk off stage, you go home, no one ever thinks of it again. There are no real sort of long-term effects and no long-term downside to that. That's why I've sort of lost fear of being on large media platforms now, because although you could say like there was like I did NPR radio and the Spanish station where it's an audience of millions. It's an audience of millions for those 10 minutes that I'm on there, and then they'll never think of me again, which is sort of kind of helpful in a way. So it might sound defeatist, but I don't mean it to be defeatist. It's kind of helpful in a way that, unless of course it's something really important for your career, like if you're in an interview, or if I mess up this meeting or this exchange or this interview, then my career's in the toilet. That's obviously quite high pressure. You can work on that, but by and large, there's a lot less sort of expectation on you than you put on yourself whenever you're doing anything really in terms of involving other people. So just consider the fact that yes, it might be intense now, it might be even embarrassing now, but in even like as little as 10 minutes, people will just not think of it again, and even if they do, it doesn't have any effect on you. So it's worth sort of just bearing in mind the lack of consequences for stuff like standing up and talking in front of people. Again, with the online world now, it's obviously things last longer. You can dredge up old tweets at any point and people can pile on. So it's probably not quite as simple as that anymore. But on a face-to-face, in-person basis, it can be quite refreshing to think, I don't think anybody cares. And that's kind of a helpful, it's not nihilistic. It's like, no, let's not build up my own paranoia here. I don't think anyone really gives a damn what I say at this point. They just want to get to the bar. And that's kind of helpful.
I think so. I think it's very easy to get stuck inside your own head and worrying about what your expectations of other people's expectations of you are. And once you get into that kind of circular thinking, it's just don't. It never ends well.
Yeah, well, that's generally a good bit of advice. It's like, you can do that all you want. Like, that's something, it's both a blessing and a curse of the human brain, in that we, like most species, we have a threat detection mechanism. These parts of our brain which scan all incoming sort of sensory information and cognitive information, looking for threats, just anything of any danger. And for most species, like that would be like, there's a predator there, run. There's lack of food here, that's bad. Or like there's a loud noise, let's run away from that. It's all very immediate of the here and now. But because we bright humans have the ability to predict and imagine and rationalize and anticipate, that means we can be scared of things which have not and may never happen. Like people are genuinely scared of losing their job, for example, even though it may never happen, it may never occur. It's something people are genuinely worried about. It causes a genuine stress reaction. And we do that with our sort of social anticipation. What if I do this and people hate me? What if everyone thinks I'm bad? What if everyone rejects me? What if everyone thinks I've done a terrible job here? These are all things which run through our minds all the time. And that's perfectly normal, but it's not necessarily helpful because we end up getting stressed by things which may not ever happen. And that's sort of a unique curse of being human in that respect, that we have the ability to think of things going wrong and be affected by them regardless of whether or not they do actually occur.
So I think, with imposter syndrome, we're scared of being judged by people who may never actually pay us any attention at all.
Exactly, yes. And that's, or people who only have their own agenda to worry about and not worried about you. It's a strange thing because I've done a lot of book talks recently since my book was out. And because I'm come from this perspective of I'm not a career researcher. I don't have sort of a reputation to lose based on wrong conclusions or data, so I don't have that much investment in that side of things, and I don't need to be seen as the big I am, the big head researcher, the big professor, the big leader of all the brains. And that's not, well, I would like that title, don't get me wrong, but I don't see it ever happening. But like when people ask me questions in talks at the Q&A section, and they say, well, how does this work? And I didn't know it was weird for me to say, I don't know. That's not something I cover. I don't think anybody knows that. And I think they expected a debate or a discussion or me to give some sort of espouse on the nature of being. But for me to say, I don't know. And a lot of people have been really happy with that because, I don't know, I think it's just refreshing to have someone who is portrayed as being a proper scientist, which I sometimes am, even though I would never claim to be one. And for them to say, I don't know, I don't know that. That's not my thing. I don't think I would ever know that. Or like that's... It's kind of sort of, it's humanizing, I think, for people to hear someone who's portrayed as being a scientist to say, we don't know. It's entirely fine. It's entirely acceptable to admit to uncertainty, to ignorance. That's not a bad thing. But it is this idea that scientists are all arrogant and lofty and booming voice from above saying, this is how things work. Do not defy me. That isn't helpful or even accurate.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of interesting stuff to think about in terms of cognitive biases and how they affect not just how we behave but also how we think about ourselves. I still have a lot of questions I could ask, but thank you for coming on and talking to us about imposter syndrome and how our brains trip us up. It's been great talking to you, Dean.
Thanks a lot too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Dean for chatting to us about the psychology of role models and the ways our brain plays tricks with our confidence. You can follow Dean on Twitter at Garwboy, Garwboy, and you can find out more about him on his website at deanburnett.com. Of course, we have links in our show notes, which you can find at findingada.com/podcast. Thanks again to our sponsor, ARM, for their ongoing support, and thanks also to our editor, Andrew Marks. Don't forget that you can subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And if you like what you hear, please share it with your friends. And, of course, make sure you get your tickets to Ada Lovelace Day Live before we sell out. You can find more information about our speakers and venue at findingada.com, where you can also buy tickets. Our next episode is a complete mystery to me, so tune in next month to find out what we've been up to. I'm looking forward to figuring it out as much as you are. Thanks for listening.